Assalamualaikum. Good day, ma'am, classmates, and friends. So, for today, I am going to continue our topic in Module 9, which is the American Colonial Period. So, so first we have the Moro province in direct rule. So as early as 1901, Emilio Aguinaldo was captured and his generals were killed or surrendered. So a little background of Emilio Aguinaldo. So Emilio Aguinaldo is a key leader in the Philippine fight for independence and was captured by American forces in 1901. His capture marked a significant point in calling resistance against American rule. So the Americans were confident to face the Moors and place them under the direct rule. So by 1902, most of Aguinaldo's generals had either been killed, captured, or surrendered, indicating the weakening of organized resistance against American forces. So, so by from 1903 to 1913, the Americans organized the Moro province, placing all Moro or Muslim districts under American military control. So, by 1903, with the defeat of key leaders, the American felt confident enough to confront the Moro people, or the Muslims in the southern Philippines, and establish direct control over them. So, um, during this period, the American organized the Moro province, bringing various Moro districts under direct military governance. So this marked a shift in how the American administration approached the local population, prioritizing military oversight. So for most of its existence, administrators of the Moro province consider military power as most essential in dealing with the Moros, who would be prepared and introduced to civil procedures and institutions under the new government. So the Moro province, therefore, was a government characterized by an amalgamation of military presence and power and civil procedures and institutions. So the American officials believed that military power was vital to manage the Moro people, so they aimed to produce civil procedures and institutions gradually, blending military authority with the establishment of civil governance. So, more on that, the Moro province was characterized by a combination of military presence and civil government, highlighting a unique approach where military might coexisted with efforts to introduce civil institutions. So the next slide is the administration structure of the Moro province. So this is the administrative structure of the Moro province. So as you can see here, we have the insular government, which has a governor general and Philippine commission. Under that, we have the Moro province. So under the Moro province, the natives were placed under the tribal ward system, wherein the tribal chieftain of the ward was held responsible for the acts of his constituents. Though the tribal wards were then placed under the municipalities, which were further organized into districts, namely, as you can see here, we have Davao, which is now composed of Davao Oriental, Davao del Norte, Davao del Sur, and Compostela Valley. But under here, we have Davao, Mati, Katiil, Banganga, and Caraga. So next, we have also the what do we call this one? Cotabato. So under that we have two municipalities back then, Cotabato and Macar. But now it includes North Cotabato, South Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, Maguindanao, and Sarangani. Next we have Lanao. Two municipalities. We have Malabang and Iligan, but now Lanao has consisted Lanao del Norte and Lanao del Sur. Next we have Sulu, three municipality which has a Hulu, Siasi, Cagayan de Sulu. So, but now Sulu has a partitioned into Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi. And lastly, we have Zamboanga. We have two municipalities back then. We have Zamboanga and Dapitan. But now, it has a Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga del Sur, and Zamboanga Sibugay. So, each district is placed under an American district governor who in turn was directly responsible to the governor of the Moro province. So next, we have the Americans started implementing policies that directly interfered with Morris affairs, among other things. Um, these policies included taxation, anti-slavery law, and disarmament policy. So before I'm going to explain that one, the period of the Moro Province from 1903 to 1913 marked a significant chapter in this history of American colonial governance in the Philippines during these years. So the American administration implemented policies that profoundly affected the lives of the Moro population, among other things. So these policies included, so number one, we have taxation. So the American authorities imposed taxes on the Moro population. This policy was seen as infringement on their autonomy and traditional way of life, leading to widespread discontent. So, and number two, we have the anti-slavery law. So the Americans enacted laws banning slavery among the Moros. So while this aimed to align with American ideals of freedom and human rights, it disrupted existing social structures and practice within Moro communities, resulting in further tensions. Right? So there is a war between Moros and Americans that period or that time. So they implemented these policies, which is the anti-slavery law. So the America had started implementing that one. So and number three, we have disarmament policy. So the disarmament policy made it illegal for the Moros to carry traditional bladed weapons. This was a direct challenge to their cultural practices and form of self-defense, generating feelings of resentment and vulnerability among the population. So in next slide, we have the implementation of these policies sparked violent reactions from the Moro people. The dissatisfaction with American rule culminated in several notable confrontations, so referred to as battles or massacres. Significance of events during this period included Bacolod, Grande, and Cotabato in 1903. So early resistance against American imposition witnessed violent clashes. So the events in Bacolod, Grande, and Cotabato in 1903 were among the first major confrontations between the Moro people and the American colonial authorities. So resistance was ignited by the introduction of taxes imposed on the Moro population, which deeply infringed upon their traditional autonomy and economic practices. So these events in 1903, the conflict escalated as local leaders or Tatas mobilized their communities against American soldiers, highlighting the growing anger over foreign interference in their lives. So these early unrest set the stage for subsequent violent ruptures, as the Moors were determined to protect their culture and autonomy from what they viewed as oppressive colonial rule. So the next event during this period was Taraka in 1907. So another notable encounter highlighting the escalating conflict. So the encounter at Taraka in 1907 further exemplified the deteriorating relationship between the Moro and people and American forces. By this time, the disarmament policy had been strictly enforced, leading to significant resentment among the Moros, who viewed the prohibition on traditional weapons as an attack on their cultural identity and self-defense. So, in 1907, when American troops attempted to enforce these policies, armed resistance erupted. So the revolt in Taraka was characterized by fierce fighting, illustrating how the Moros were increasingly united against perceived threats to their way of life. So this conflict not only reflected the immediate tension but also underscored a growing commitment among the Moros to resist American domination. So next one we have the Bodaho in 1907. Marked by intense fighting, Bodaho became a symbol of more resistance against American control. The Battle of Bodaho also in 1907 as same of Taraka 1907. So stand out as one of the most significant confrontations during the Moro Province period. So the conflict occurred on a volcanic crater where about 1,000 men and children had sought refuge, believing it would protect them from American forces. So, but Daho, in March of that year, so American troops launched a military assault on Budaho, seeking to quell the resistance. The ensuing battle was marked by intense fighting and significant casualties on both sides. So the Moors fought valiantly to defend their territory and way of life. So while our American forces ultimately claimed victory, the resistance at Badaho became a powerful symbol of moral defiance and resilience against colonial oppression, commenting its place in the historical narrative of the region. So next one we have the Budbagsak in 1913. So this decisive confrontation underscored the ongoing struggle of the Moros against enforced policies. So the Battle of Budbagsak in 1913 was one of the last significant confrontations during the Moro province period. So this event took place against a backdrop of persistent unrest caused by continued American attempts to impose control through military might and oppressive policies. So in 1913, in this confrontation, Moro forces once again gathered to resist American troops. So the battle was fierce and bloody. So this war is very very there's a lot of casualties during that time. So this war is also significant in the history of Minsopala. So the with many casualties on both sides, but it also showcased the determination of the Mar people to fight for their autonomy until the very end. So Budbagsak signified the culmination of more resistance in the face of systematic policies aimed to suppressing their culture and rights. Even though the Americans were successful in this battle, the ferocity of Moro resistance during Budbagsak served as a poignant reminder of their struggle and left an indelible mark on the historical consciousness of the Moro people. So the American, of course, did not hesitate to deal with the Moors violently, so that by the 1913, the disarmament and subjugation of the Muslims of Mindanao and Sulu had become very evident. So American superiority in military power had not only silenced Moro defiance and resistance, but also forcibly brought together the peoples of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao into one highly centralized and unitary Philippine colony. So this was also the way for us to gather or to unite with the Luzon and Visayas. So the Department of Mindanao and Sulu and Philippinization. So because Moros could no longer resist in mass, the phenomenon called Horamentado arose with growing frequency. So Horamentados were Moros who swore to kill as many invaders as they could before they would die. So to dig deeper on the meaning of Joramentado. So a Joramentado was a Moro who made a vow or a Joramento to kill as many invaders, primarily soldiers or colonists, so as possible before they themselves were killed. So this act was often seen as both of religious and moral duty, mingling resistance with a sense of honor. So they were common during the Spanish period. No, Haramantada were common during the Spanish period, but they became more numerous during the American colonization of Mindanao and Sulu. In fact, the Americans were so disturbed by the mounting problem with Haramantada so that the 45 caliber was prescribed to be the standard sidearm of American soldiers to address it. So the adoption of 45 caliber faced with the increasing instances of Romentado attacks, American military leaders found traditional weaponry inadequate. So the 45 caliber handgun was introduced as the sidearm. That's what I have mentioned. This was introduced as the standard sidearm for the soldiers, being more effective against the determined and often fearless attackers. And it's a continuation of the last slide. So it must be mentioned that the United States had always wanted to project a good image. Hence, when she decided to acquire the Philippines as colony, she made sure that she had the best moral justification. So for this reason, she would announce to the world the benevolent assimilation proclamation. So the document made by the President William McKinley, which states that the Philippines was not for the United States to exploit, but to develop, to civilize, to educate, and to train in the science of self-government. So this proclamation was simply another way of saying that America was going to colonize the Filipinos, not for the sake of the Americans, but for the sake of the Filipinos. Hence, McKinley wrote, to give Philippines back to Spain is not honorable. To leave them to another countries is not acceptable. To allow them to be free is unthinkable. They would tear or at each other. I decided to keep the Philippines for us to civilize. So, this fundamentally painted American colonization as an act of philanthropy rather than imperialism. So, McKinley emphasizes that the intentions were noble, positioning the U.S. as a guiding force for the Filipino rather than a conquering nation. In his rationale, McKinley argued strongly against returning the Philippines to Spain or leaving them to be governed by other foreign powers. He believed that returning the islands to Spain would be dishonorable and contrary to American ideals. Another one is allowing other nations to take control posed a threat to the Filipinos' welfare, which is check, right? So, granting complete independence to the Philippines would lead to chaos as he feared that the various factions with the archipelago would descend into conflict. So, as a closer look at the benevolent assimilation proclamation would reveal that the Americans were supposedly looking forward to a date in the future where Filipinos were exercise self-government and eventually became independent. So all this started to come true when the Democrats won in 1913. So as a matter of policy, the Democrats desired to accelerate the move towards self-government and independence for the Philippines. Gradually, the Democrats would transfer to the control of the insular government from American to Filipino hands. This policy was known as Philippinization. So part of the Philippinization program was to abolish the Moro province, which championed direct rule. So thus in 1913, the Moro province would be reorganized into the Department of Mindanao and Sulu. Under the department, the former districts of the Moro province were turned into regular provinces, plus the new provinces of Agusan and Bukidnon. So the next slide is the administrative structure of the department. This one. So as pointed out earlier, Philippinization of colonial administration would be pursued under the Department of Mindanao and Sulu. Accordingly, Filipinos officials assume increasingly greater responsibilities in the government of Moraland. However, the term Filipino and the Philippinization program appeared to be almost exclusive to Christian Filipinos. Thus, the Philippinization program that was vigorously pursued under the department had even caused more resentments instead of more enthusiasm, participation, and excitement. So, in any case, the Philippinization program of the colonial administration under the Department of Mindanao and Sulu would continue whether the Moors were happy or not. For approximately 7 years, the department would advance the program until May 1920, when it was formally abolished. Thereafter, more affairs would then be placed under the control of the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes under the Department of the Interior, where, as you can see here, under the Department of the Interior, where administrative as well as legislative control of Moraland was even firmly secured in Christian Filipino hands. So, let's move on to policy of attraction. In fairness to the Americans, however, they would also exert efforts to countervail the ill effects of colonialism to mitigate the resentments of the Moros. For instance, the colonial government would come up with programs and projects that would attract the former. So, free education was in institutionalized in public schools were established almost everywhere in the Moro districts. Attendance was made compulsory so that each Moro family was required to send at least one child to school. So, the colonial government also created the Pensionado program, which sent non-Christian natives to Manila and America for higher learning educational tours. It was said that some of the royal families, especially in Lana, were so afraid that the education of their children under the Christians, Americans, would mean their children's conversion to Christianity. Thus, instead of sending their own children to school, they sent the son and daughters of their slaves. So, instead na they were afraid no for the welfare of their son and daughters or their children. So during that time na gi-implement sa Americans ang free education and the pensionado program, they came up to idea nga they were sent their slaves children para ron ma-save ang ilang children because they were afraid na mag-convert ang ilang mga anak into Christianity. So the policy of attraction was approach employed by the American colonial government in the Philippines, so particularly aimed at alleviating tensions and resentments from various indigenous groups, including the Moros. The intent behind this policy was create more favorable relationship between the colonial authorities and the local population by promoting social and educational initiatives. So, in free education, um, the establishment of public schools across Mara district was a significant aspect of this policy. So the government aimed to provide accessible education to the Moros who had historically been marginalized under colonial rule. So the introduction of compulsory education mandated that at least one child from each Moro family attend school. This initiative sought to encourage educational attainment and integration into the broader socio-political fabric of the Philippines. So we have also here which has the colonial government also created the Pensionado program. So launched as part of the broader educational reforms, the Pensionado program targeted non-Christian natives, allowing them to travel to Manila or even the United States for higher education and cultural exposure. So the participants in the program would receive financial support for their studies, and upon completion, they were expected to return to their communities to apply their knowledge and skills for local development. So, how did American policy or practice contribute to the present Mindanao problem? So, we see four major contributions of the United States policy to the Mindanao problem. So, we have number one, we have the letter A, we have the forcible incorporation of Mindanao and Sulu. Letter B, we have resettling Christians natives to Mindanao. Letter C, discriminatory land laws. Letter D, making Mindanao part of the U.S. territory. We have four major contribution of United States policy to the Mindanao problem. But on behalf of my report, my report will focus on the letter A and B, and the following will be discussed with my co-reporter. So let's move on to the forcible incorporation of Mindanao and Sulu. As you can see in the picture, we have the Treaty of Paris in 1898 and the Governor Carpenter with a Sultan. So in the second picture. So the first of its contribution of the Americans to the Mindanao problem was when they included Maguindanao and Sulu in the purchase made during the Treaty of Paris. As pointed out already, the two sultanates used to be independent from Spanish Filipinas, yet deliberately. The Americans still included them. What made things worse was that they completed the subjugation of the Moors and therefore succeeded in forcibly incorporating them into the predominantly Christian Philippines. Following the treaty, the U.S. aimed to establish control over the entire Philippines, including the regions like Mindanao and Sulu, which were resistant to colonial rule. So American colonizers viewed the Moors as uncivilized and deemed it necessary to impose control to civilize and assimilate them into the American system. You said the Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898, formally ending the Spanish-American War. Spain ceded the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico to the United States for $20 million. So the Philippines, previously under Spanish colonial rule for over 300 years, found itself transitioning from Spanish to American rule without a clear agreement regarding the fate of various regions, particularly Mindanao and Sulu. So the treaty did not explicitly ensure the rights or autonomy of the Moro peoples in Mindanao and Sulu, who had their own distinct identities and governance systems. So there was a significant disparity between the Christian majority in northern regions and the predominantly Muslim southern regions in terms of culture, religion, and governance. So we have the resettling, letter B, we have the resettling Christians natives to Mindanao. First, we have after the subjugation of the Moros, the Americans introduced in 1912 the idea of resettling landless, but industrious farmers from Luzon and Visayas on Mindanao. So, after defeating Muslims' resistance in Mindanao, the U.S. colonial government had full control of the region, allowing them to implement social and land policies without local consent. So, next we have this was the policy of assimilation by colonists combining a minority of Moors with a majority of Filipinos. So, assimilation by colonists, this refers to the deliberate plan of the Americans to integrate or absorb the Muslim, or what we call Moro, population into the mainstream Christian Filipino society by settling large numbers of Christian Filipinos from Luzon and Visayas in Muslim majority areas of Mindanao. So the combining a minority of Moros with a majority of Filipinos, this shows the intentions of to change the demographic balance by surrounding or mixing the Moro population with the larger number of Christian settlers. So the idea was that over time, the Moros would adapt to the customs, beliefs, and political system of the Christians Filipinos. So this was the policy. So the Moro colonies also agriculture colonies which American administration under General John Pershing and Frank Carpenter established on the Cotabato Valley in Lanao. So the phrase Moro colonies, also agricultural colonies, refers to a program created by the American colonial government to encourage the settlement of Christian Filipinos in Mindanao, especially in areas like Cotabato Valley and Lanao. So these colonies were established under the leadership of General John Pershing and Governor Frank Carpenter in the early 1990s. No, 90s. So the goal was to develop the fertile lands of Mindanao by bringing in hardworking farmers from Luzon and Visayas who needed land. So by settling Christians among the Moros or the Muslims, the Americans hoped to assimilate or integrate the Moro people into the mainstream Christian Filipino society. Establishing these colonies helped the Americans maintain control over the Muslim population, who were known to resist both Spanish and American rule. So that is for my report, guys. Again, I am Rhea Fe Amordola Ogan. So thank you so much for listening and for watching. Bye!